forget that 28 years from 1920 to 1948, the British military and the British police and the British government were very involved with the Jewish community as well as with the Arab community. But from our point of view, we were at that time with a very major organization, HAGANA, and you see here the symbol of HAGANA with the three stamps of the three missions of HAGANA. HAGANA literally means defense, but the organization of HAGANA was responsible for three missions. One was security, the typical security to secure the Jewish community at that time from different threats, especially from the threat of the Arabs who lived here. Not all the Arabs, but terror started at that days against the Jewish community. So security was our first and important mission. The second mission, which is not typical to such organizations, to an organization of security and defense, was settlement. Between 1920 to 1948, we built in Palestine 250 Jewish settlements, different settlements of different types, but especially in the borders of Palestine, and it was for us a major contribution to the future of the State of Israel. And the third mission was what we call in Hebrew, ha'apala and bricha, our target to defend the Jewish communities after the Holocaust and those who survived. We made a lot of operations in order to bring them to our home in Palestine and to the State of Israel later. And these three missions involved more than 40,000 Jewish soldiers and Jewish operators. And of course, all this system was based on a very important leadership. Leadership was, as usual, we have to decide the targets, we have to fulfill these missions by capabilities, and the Jewish community was very modest also in terms of values, but especially modest in terms of measures and number of people. And we succeeded to bring the Jewish community from the status of pre-state to the State of Israel. To this evening forum is devoted especially to one of the very important operations. Unfortunately, it was not, although it was the first operation, it was not a story of success, but it was a story of cooperation between the Jewish operation Palmach organization, which was a factor of the Hagana from 1941 to 1948, and the cooperation with the British is our topic this evening. I thank Paul and Erez, who will lead this evening to understand not only the story, but especially the lessons from the story to our generation and to the future. Thank you all.
Brian, thank you very much for the opening remarks and for mentioning the hostages. We pray and hope they'll be back soon, as soon as possible. We will now move to the second, I would say, co-host, well, not so much host, but the person who's very much part of this common heritage, the Israeli Navy Vice Admiral retired David Ben Bashat, currently leading the Israeli Navy League, very much like the HAGANA heritage, previously the Commander-in-Chief of the Israeli Navy. And I will lead over to you, Admiral Ben Bashat, please, for your opening remarks. Admiral Ben Bashat, please, if you could start with your opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Erez. And let me participate to Ephraim for the willingness and the hope that our people will come as soon as possible back from the Hamas to their family. All of us thinking about this day and night. This is the most priority for all of us. Then good evening, good afternoon in UK. I'm very happy to participate and to be part of this discussion. I believe that this issue is very, very important for the legacy of Great Britain and the legacy of Israel. I finished my duty as the chief of the Israeli Navy in 2008 and retired after 30 years of service. Before serving in the Navy, I was a student in boarding maritime high school under the Navy, the Ministry of Transportation, and the Ministry of Education. And in those times, most of the officers in the Navy used to come from this school. I mention all this to tell you that in the last year in the high school, the name of the high school changed. For a regular name of school for officer in the Merchant Marine and in the Navy, the manager of the school that we used to be Chief of Navy, Admiral Tankus, and in those time his Vice President, Vice Manager, the lady Shoshana Spector. She was in charge on the administration of the school. Both of them. Shoshana was the widow of the commander of the boat, and Admiral Tankus in those times was one of the one that chose the people, the 23 people from the HAGANA to sail with the boat. And I believe that both of them decide for commemorate these heroes that lost in this operation to put the name of the school under them. And I'm very, very happy to say that I'm graduate from the school that carry the name of these heroes. With your permission, before I talk specific about the Bosaan operation or the Operation Bosaan, I want to use this opportunity because of the people from UK and the people from Israel, and to tell you about exciting experience that I had as the chief of the Israeli Navy visiting UK. It was in 2005. I was invited to a celebration of 200 years for Trafalgar battle, together with many other chief of Navy. I was invited by the British Chief of Navy, and while we be there, we sail on the Royal Navy flagship, HMS Endurance, to see and to watch demonstration of the battle. And while we are sailing, suddenly, I need to mention that on board was the Queen of England, the Honorable Elizabeth II, and her son, the Prince Charles, today the King, and both of them sail with us to see the demonstration. And while we are sailing, the Prince Charles approached me and he asked me why we are doing a fence in the sea in Gaza. It's not enough that we are surrounding Gaza by the land with the fence. Why we need to do fence also at the sea? And I explained to the prince that this is not a fence. We are building obstacle because very close to the border with Gaza, there is a port that called Ashkelon Port with a very important pipe for fuel between the Red Sea and the Mediterranean, between Eilat and Ashkelon. And we know that this is a target for the Hamas, the maritime terror Hamas. And therefore we need to put obstacle at sea. If not, they can sail very close to the shore and our radar not detect them. By making this type of obstacle in the border, it's forced them to bypass the obstacle. And once they are bypass the obstacle and they go more deeply to the sea, then our radar can detect them. And this is exactly what happened in the 7th of October. 7 boats of the maritime terror of the Hamas tried to penetrate to Israel. And because of this obstacle, they bypass it, and then the radar detect them, and therefore the maritime forces of Israel was ready to fight with them, and they succeed to sink 5 from the 7 boats of the Hamas, but unfortunately 2 of the boats succeed to land in the Israeli coast, and therefore they found people in recreation mode on the beach, and they kill many of them. But when this happened, all this story came to my memory, and therefore I don't know. I think that Erez published the picture while I'm talking to the prince and the defense attaché of Israel, that saw that we are discussing, took the picture, both of us with Navy uniform, because he was also from the Navy, the Prince Charles. And the day after, it was published in the British media and also in the Israeli media, and under the underline the Prince and the Admiral. And I want to share, it was very, very exciting for me, and I want to share it with you. And thank you very much, Ernst, that you let me tell our friend in UK and Israel about this story. Going back to the Kav Gimel or Kav Daled or Operation Bosaan, this operation is very, very important to the Israeli Navy. It was the first operation, I believe, of the Palmach that just created in 1941 from the HAGANA forces. If we understand correctly, the idea was that the cooperation between the HAGANA and the British Army of the Mandat was that the British Army liked to build a force of fighters that they can use them to make operation in very sensitive area. For example, we are talking now about Vichy, refinery in Lebanon, in Tripoli. And the British Army preferred that somebody else would do the job for them. And the HAGANA agreed to do this type of jobs. So it wasn't the only one, there was some jobs also in Europe. And they, for the Navy operation, they chose 40 guys that used to be in association organization, maritime social organization, people that know how to operate a sailing boat, and they trained them in Tel Aviv, in the Arcon River over there, and it was like 40 people, and they chose 23 of them to do this operation with a police boat that the British gave them. The ammunition and the guns came from the HAGANA, and they participate, a major Falmer as a liaison officer to be with them. Therefore, they become 24. All the story, Mr. Paul McCue will tell you about it, but I can emphasize that it was the first, maybe the building blocks of our Navy. From these people, the remaining people of the 40 continue to train and continue to work with the British and make some other operation. And later on, other people joined them. And this was the first, not the only one, but one of the forces that built the Palyam and later on built the Navy. And therefore, it's so important to us. And again, so I'm very, very happy that we make this event today and that we are going to listen to Paul McCue and see here how the British understand this operation. And thank you very much. I believe we're going to have a very interesting lecture. Thank you.
Admiral Ben-Bashat, thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Dudu, also on behalf of the HAGANA organization.
Yes. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, both of you, General Lapid and Admiral Ben-Bashat, for those opening remarks. We will now go to the lecture by Mr. Paul McCue. Again, Paul, thank you very much for joining us from the UK. It's amazing what technology can do today, as they say. Again, it will be about 40 minutes plus, and we will try and stay on mute and allow Paul to do his, give his lecture as easy as possible. Hopefully, the technology will not fail us. I am now going to stop sharing and allow Paul to share his presentation. So again, thank you very much, Generals Lapid and Admiral Ben-Bashat. Paul, really, thank you so much for spending the time, for investing the time with us and giving us of your lecture and your information and knowledge. So, Paul, I'm going to stop sharing and over to you, please.
Okay, thank you, Erez, and shalom, everyone. For some reason, here we go, found it.
There it is.
Okay.
Yeah, technology at its best. Thank you so much.
Okay. Right. I would just say that so far I'm very impressed with everybody pronouncing BOATSWAIN as Bosaan. And I would expect the Admiral to have got that right, but well done. And for the benefit of everybody else, although it's spelt BOATSWAIN, it is an Old English pronunciation of Bosaan, which is how you spell it. So I am hoping that, here we go. A little bit about myself. 34 years in the public and governmental sector. I have always been a civilian. I've not been in the military. I've had a hearing problem from young age, so I never got into the military. But I was Armed Forces advisor for one of the local government areas of London, dealing generally with the British Army. I moved to the private sector of a London-based leisure and culture company, of which I was managing director. And I retired in 2018 to take over this military history charity, Secret World War II. And so I've been a military and local historian, author and researcher for an awfully long time, over 35 years. And just for information, I'm a resident of the county of Hampshire, which is about 75 kilometers southwest of London. And those with a naval background will recognize the port of Portsmouth. I'm about half an hour north of Portsmouth. I'm the executive trustee of Secret World War II, and we are a UK registered educational charity dealing with the secret, behind the lines, resistance, special forces, special operations elements of the Second World War. And we have three main aims: educate, commemorate, and inspire. Before I start, I'd just like to thank for the invitation to participate Erez David Meisel, and for inspiration to Martin Sugarman, who is the archivist of the Association of Jewish ex-servicemen and women here in the UK. And there you see also some photo and image credits, in particular the Palm Museum, using a few of their photographs. And I would just say that if there are any questions, hopefully I can answer them at the end. And please use the chat function to submit any questions. I think that's the way you want it. Yes, Erez? Is that okay? Yeah. Right. A little about a background of tensions. And I'm sure many of you will know of these. But from 1936, there were British restrictions on Jewish immigration into Mandate Palestine, and that is roughly a third of what the Jewish Agency wanted, and was really a restriction on the Balfour Declaration of a Jewish homeland. So the tensions started to raise. In 1937, there was the Peel Commission by the British government, when Britain decided that the mandate was unworkable and that partition would be necessary. And in May 1939, British White Paper decided that partition was unworkable. So the White Paper approved a Jewish homeland, but in one independent state, which would therefore have a large Arab majority population. So not a popular move for the Jewish community. The British continued immigration restrictions and started to restrict Jewish land purchases as well. As a result of that, in 1939, there were demonstrations and strikes by the Jewish community. And there you see an image from Tel Aviv in 1939 of demonstrations against the British. But then in September 1939, as World War II started, the head of the Jewish Agency for Palestine, David Ben-Gurion, he came up with a very famous quotation: "We will fight the white paper as if there is no war, and fight the war as if there is no white paper." So that second element, fight the war as if there is no white paper, set the scene for cooperation with the British. In June 1940, we had seen the defeat of France, and the Vichy government took over for part of France, and there were German and Italian occupied zones, and Vichy France also managed the overseas territories. So there was a threatened German invasion of Britain, but at the very same time, when Britain was on the back foot, really, at the start of the Second World War in 1940, but at the same time, we decided that we wanted to immediately continue the fight in enemy-occupied Europe. So we weren't going to let Hitler rest on his laurels. So something called the Special Operations Executive, SOE, was founded. And ironically, the founding charter, which was signed on the 19th of July 1940, was signed by Neville Chamberlain. You see a photograph of him here. He was a former Prime Minister, and at the time he was something called the Lord President of the Council of the Coalition Government under Winston Churchill. So Winston Churchill headed a coalition government with Labour members in it, as well as Conservative. And it was Chamberlain who, ironically, had been the architect of appeasement and so much criticism in the lead up to the Second World War. And yet it was he who drafted and signed the founding charter. And the charter for SOE was to take the fight to the enemy. And in addition to having been the architect of appeasement, Chamberlain had, of course, been Prime Minister for the 1939 White Paper. The role of SOE was to conduct subversion, sabotage, and reconnaissance in occupied Europe, initially against occupied Europe, but spreading across the world as the war developed, against the Axis powers, and to aid local resistance movements. So it was to supply, train, and help organize resistance movements in the occupied countries. And once it had been founded, Prime Minister Winston Churchill is the man who is very much identified with SOE, and he then ordered it to set Europe ablaze. And although the emphasis to begin with was on Europe, it was a global organization right the way across the places like India, Singapore, Australia. There was conflict with Britain's Secret Intelligence Service, and the reason for that is I sum it up as hush hush versus bang bang. So the Secret Intelligence Service, also known under its wartime cover name of MI6, which has continued, so it's also known as MI6 as well as SIS, they wanted to go about their operations on the continent in a very quiet way, the hush-hush way, and they were very concerned that Special Operations Executive, being responsible for sabotage, would be creating lots of bangs and drawing attention onto their own activities. So that's why I call it hush-hush versus bang-bang. And with the Secret Intelligence Service having been a long developed organization, they also saw SOE as very amateurish. So the role of SOE in Mandate Palestine. From soon after its inception in 1940, SOE had become involved with the HAGANA, which, as you know, was the previously underground army of the Jewish community, the Yishuv in Palestine. And because they were facing the common enemy of the Axis powers and the potential of a German thrust from North Africa towards Egypt and Mandate Palestine, that concentrated minds and made us fall into each other's arms. So SOE began funding and helping with military training for HAGANA members. And from very early on, one can see from the British files here in the National Archives that the Jewish community in Palestine were known as Friends. The problem that arose, and indeed infighting with the British, arose from the fact that SOE was organized from Cairo. Its Middle East offices were in Cairo. And what SOE was doing was largely without the knowledge and approval of the British Mandate colonial authorities in Jerusalem. But SOE were under pressure for results. There was quite a lot of criticism from both the army and the Secret Intelligence Service of how SOE was going about its job in Cairo. And so, as I say, they were under pressure for results, not just in the Middle East, but also generally in SOE. And it's worth remembering that Britain effectively, but not officially, was at war with Vichy France from July 1940 through to November 1942, when the Germans and Italians took over Vichy France. We, the British, had attacked the Vichy French fleet at Mers el Kabir in French Algeria in July 1940, on the 3rd of July, and the French had retaliated by bombing Gibraltar. Not a very well-known fact, but they did do so. And the USA and even our big allies, the Canadians, have maintained diplomatic relations with Vichy France until November 1942. And of course, Vichy France controlled Lebanon and Syria, which bordered the British-controlled Mandate of Palestine. There you see an image of the bombing of the French fleet at Mers el Kabir. That's the battleship Strasbourg. So there you see a map of the League of Nations mandates dating from 1920, and you see clearly the British mandate for Palestine and also for Transjordan and Iraq, neighboring onto the French mandates for Syria and Lebanon. So in Palestine, SOE originally looked for help with land-based intelligence gathering and sabotage activities, but by late 1940, so only a few months after SOE had been created, SOE asked the HAGANA for volunteers to take part in sea operations and seaborne assault. and offered to help with the training of them. That training commenced in the mouth of the Yukon River on the northern edge of Tel Aviv, and a little further up the coast as well, near Herzliya, and also at Kaisaria. And by May 1941, HAGANA was producing commando-trained personnel, the Friends, for land and sea operations for the use of SOE. One of the sites that the HAGANA was using, the Levant Fair site in Tel Aviv, there was a secret weapons factory. So there the HAGANA was starting to produce weapons and explosives for their operations, for their coming operations. The British saw the Vichy French territories as a threat to their interests in the Middle East, and they committed themselves to military action and were already planning an invasion of Syria and Lebanon, which was to be called Operation Exporter. For May of 1941, it was actually postponed until the June, because they were concerned that once an invasion started, that the German and Italian air forces would come to the help of the Vichy French, and therefore that they would need the fuel coming from the Lebanon facilities. The HAGANA agreed to support British invasion and founded the PALMAC, the elite fighting force of the HAGANA. It was formed on the 15th of May 1941 and immediately committed. Now I'm going to cause a little bit of controversy here, but be patient with me until later on. But it committed 22, not yet 23, of its best men to a seaborne sabotage operation for the British to precede the invasion of Lebanon and Syria. So to try and knock out those fuel facilities on the Lebanese coast. But remember that 22 to begin with. I'll come back to that later. We know that the 22 were trained in boat use by Captain, later Lieutenant Colonel Nicholas Hammond of SOE. He had transferred to SOE from one of its constituent founding elements, which was Section D, D for destruction, of the Secret Intelligence Service, MI6. He had already been active in Palestine. He had been training Jewish people in sabotage at the Kadumim quarry, and he transferred over to SOE when it was created. He was commissioned in the Intelligence Corps, and he now helped training with the boat use for the HAGANA members. And so the PALMAC's naval section was formed, and some absolutely fantastic photographs in the PALMAC archives, thanks to Eldad at the museum there when I visited a few years ago. And I'll just quickly whiz through these, but as you can see, some very good range of photographs of the training on the Yukon River. And we think there that in that photograph in the foreground, on the stern of the boat, we think that is Nicholas Hammond himself. And some of the men who took part in Operation Bosum can be identified in these photographs quite clearly. That's my favorite. Having done quite a bit of ocean rowing or tidal rowing myself over the years, I just absolutely love that photograph. It's a very moving photograph to me. So, Operation Bosum. The target of the Vichy French oil refinery and storage tanks at Tripoli in Lebanon, very heavily defended. And there you see a photograph of them. And the Vichy French army were using colonial troops in Lebanon, including those from Senegal, and we know that there were Senegalese troops in the area of Tripoli. The boat to be used was borrowed from the Port and Marine Division of the Palestine Police Force, and this was called the Sea Lion. I won't try the pronunciation, or perhaps I will, Ari Hayam, if my Hebrew is up to scratch errors. It had been used as part of the Palestine Patrol, which was against the landing of Jewish immigrants. And of course, we British termed them illegal immigrants. It was only 60 foot long. It had twin diesel engines driving two twin screws. And to begin with, the boat was first sailed by a Palmach crew from Tel Aviv up to Haifa. We believe this is a photograph of the Sea Lion itself, and the following photograph is either it or one of its sister ships in the River Thames before it was transferred over to Palestine. So you can see exactly the sort of boat there. I go back to that one, and there you have it again. And here's one of its sister boats, the Shark. And if you look at that, what I would call a launch, is that suitable for the numbers and equipment of Operation Bosaan from looking at it? And in other than coastal waters, because it was really designed only to operate in coastal waters. But as you'll see, the operation called for the boat to go further out to sea. The crew, the skipper was Katriel Yaffe on the left there, and the mate was Amiram Shohat on the right. And here you see standing up, you see Yaffe there, the skipper standing up while they're training. And the plan was for the Sea Lion to sail up to Haifa during the day on the Saturday, the 17th of May, 1941. And the point of departure from Haifa would be the seawater cooling pool of the power station there, which was a more secluded spot than the main harbour and with no workforce present because this would be on the Sabbath. The weapons and explosives had been promised by the British to come from Egypt, but they had failed to arrive. And so they were replaced from HAGANA stocks. And that raises the question, were those explosives unstable? And we will come back to that later on. But another theory is that the HAGANA preferred to use their own supplies rather than rely on the British. So now this is your 23rd man. This is an engineer, Israel Norden, who joined the group at Haifa, the 23rd man. He had not done the same training as the others, and he was not part of the Palmach, but he had served on one of the Palestine police launchers that the British were using to intercept Jewish immigrants. So he was familiar with the type of boat. And in reality, he was an undercover member of the HAGANA planted in the Palestine police in order to help sabotage the anti-immigrant operations. So you can relax, everybody. We are now up to the full 23. There you see the Haifa power plant and beautiful Art Deco type building from the 20s or 30s, and elements of it still there today. And I was just looking on the web this morning, beautiful interior to it, lovely boardroom, etc. Must try and visit it one day. And this is where it was, thanks to Erez, who's been down and pinpointed it for me. And you can see there where the Haifa power plant is, and the area where that more modern breakwater is at the moment. That's the area from which the operation was to leave. So at Haifa, the operations commander, Lieutenant Zvi Spector, and his deputy, Yitzhak Hecker, they and their men boarded the Sea Lion, loaded their replacement weapons, explosives, stores, and a couple of dinghies onto the launch. And they were joined at this point by their SOE liaison officer, Major Sir Anthony Palmer. You see him at the top there. He had stayed overnight in Haifa at the home of one of the HAGANA's leaders, David Hakohen, who you see pictured at the bottom. He was the director of the Office of Public Works and Planning in Mandate Palestine, and was on very good terms with the British, did a lot of liaison work between the HAGANA and the British. So Palmer stayed at his home overnight and then went down to join the boat in the morning. So again, he had not taken part in any of the training. And so as I term him there, I think he was more a liaison officer rather than the leader of the operation, which I think would still remain as Spector. Palmer had a very different background to the 23. Anthony Frederick Mark Palmer succeeded in 1931 to the title of 4th Baronet Palmer of Grintle Park, Yorkshire. And there you see the stately home, which was the ancestral home of the Palmers. Very highly educated at Marlborough College, Oxford University, and the Royal Military College at Sandhurst. He served in the Queen's Own Yorkshire Dragoons, in the Northumberland Fusiliers, and in the Royal Artillery, from where he joined SOE. And as I say, I would call him the liaison officer, not the operations commander. And I think for that reason, historically, he has not been numbered among the 24. I do understand that there are people who have said that the number should be 24 because Palmer lost his life with the 23. Personally, I'm quite relaxed about that. I think the fact that they've been known as the 23 who went down with the ship, it's very, very difficult to change that now. And indeed, because I see Palmer as the liaison officer rather than the commander, as I say, I'm relaxed. I've got no British drum to beat on it being 24. So Spector himself had orders not to land at Tripoli because he'd injured his leg in a motorcycle accident recently, but he insisted on still going on the operation. And instead of him going ashore, Hecker was to lead the sabotage party using the 2 dinghies which had been loaded at Haifa onto the boat. And if they were unable to return to the boat, the assault party who were going ashore were given money, the address of a safe house in the Beirut suburbs, and addresses of Jews in Beirut and Damascus, because of course at that time there were still minority populations of Jews in both cities. So the route, this is where it gets problematic for a coastal vessel like the Sea Lion, because to begin with, the Sea Lion was to first head westwards, well out to sea, on the morning of Sunday, the 18th of May. You'll remember it went to Haifa on the 17th. And then it was to head north to run parallel to the coast until turning back to a landfall north of Tripoli to land its Palmach commandos around midnight. And for the return journey in daylight, they were to head to one of the isolated bays on the easternmost side of Cyprus and then sail for Haifa at night. So they would go across the Mediterranean to Cyprus on the way back. And similarly, if the outward journey proved slow, they would also lie up off Cyprus in order to spend the minimum amount of daylight sailing anywhere near the Lebanese coast. So if they hit rough seas, they were expected to lie up off Cyprus. And to get across to Cyprus from Haifa in that size of vessel was, I think, asking for problems, especially if the vessel was heavily loaded as it was. So there's the route, heading out to sea and then back into the coast towards Tripoli. And you can see it's quite a distance to get up to Tripoli, well past Beirut. So Sunday morning, the 18th of May, the waves were surprisingly high, even in the cooling pool where the boat was kept, which was sheltered by the breakwater. And Yaffe, the Sea Lion skipper, therefore gave orders that everything had to be securely lashed down onto the launcher's deck. So because of that, the stowing of equipment took longer than expected. Space was at an absolute premium, with 24 people on board, as well as all the stores and the explosives. And departure was delayed until 0700, which was an hour later than the planned time. So it then got underway and sailed slowly out to sea, watched and described by David Hacohen and 2 of his fellow HAGANA leaders. And in his biography, in his autobiography, Hacohen comments on the fact that the sea was rough, and they were very worried watching them head out to sea in that type of vessel and in that type of sea. And there you see the sort of rough weather, the rough seas described by HAGANA right on the coast. So nothing more was ever seen of the 23 or of Major Palmer after the Sea Lion disappeared over the horizon out of Haifa. No attack took place on the oil refinery. No enemy force ever claimed responsibility for the team's capture, ambush, or destruction, or of the Sea Lion itself. And no bodies were conclusively found. I use the term conclusively because there were rumors of bodies washed ashore, but no identities were ever proved. There was evidence of just one radio message, and here you see it from a British file. It was received 4 hours after the Sea Lion had left on the 18th of May 1941, and it says, "Boat OK 60 from Haifa," and it's believed that 60 meant 60 miles from Haifa. But since then, no news. And there was a watcher. There was an agent at Tripoli who reported that the boat had never reached there. So the thinking at the time, as included in this message, says that they may have encountered a French naval unit, but the apparent possibilities are that they were captured or that the boat had foundered, had gone down. So the disappearance, at least 7 theories that I know of. First of all, you'll remember that the British explosives promised from Egypt had not arrived. So either the HAGANA had replaced them with their own, and they might have been unstable, who knows? So that was one theory, that they're unstable explosives and that they had blown up at sea. Second theory was that the Sea Lion had been sunk by an Italian submarine. That would have been due to enemy intelligence services having uncovered the operation. And indeed, the Italian intelligence services were pretty good, very, very hot. But there was no claim by an Italian submarine. So I think we can discount that one. Third, as contained in the message you saw just earlier, that it was intercepted and sunk by the Vichy French Coast Guard, but again, no French record of that. It may have been sunk by the Surcouf, which was a Vichy French cruiser submarine. You can see the huge guns on it there. That was at sea in the area, but again, there was no claim to having engaged the Sea Lion. It may have hit a mine. There were mines floating around in the Eastern Mediterranean, so that would be as good an explanation as any. Or it could have got ashore, the party could have got ashore, and they could have been surprised by the Vichy French Senegalese troops, killed or taken prisoner and later executed. But that would have also included taking the launch offshore, and there was, despite, again, rumors and stories, no great evidence of that. And finally, the potential that it capsized at sea in rough weather. So it has to be said it was an absolutely disastrous start for the Palmach. Badly affected morale in the nascent naval section of the Palmach. It was seen as a tragedy by the HAGANA leaders who realized that they'd lost many of their finest recruits and young men who could have been expected to be future leaders of Israel. And David HAGANA, in his autobiography, used the term, "My heart was breaking," when he realized that they had disappeared. Just before we continue to look at Bosaan, another similar failure, which was very little known, but I came across it purely by chance, really, when researching Bosaan in the British files. And on the 7th of June, so bear in mind, we were talking about Bosaan on the 18th of May, 1941. So on the 7th of June, another competing British Secret Service, competing with SOE, called GR, This is an organization which really should have been superseded by SOE, but was trying to cling on. They had their own training establishment in Palestine, and they launched an 8-man attack by motorboat from Haifa on telephone lines near Beirut. So again, this was just before the invasion. And what happened here was that it says here, if I can read it out to you, the sea was rough. Most of us had been seasick. And the party sent ashore after about an hour and a half. Captain Scaife returned to the boat by swimming, and he reported that the small boat, which they'd been using to get ashore, had capsized, and that Lieutenant Commander Marshall and Corporal Rappaport were missing. He believed them to be drowned, and that he, nevertheless, has still managed to cut the telephone wires. So there was some success to that, but again, an inappropriate boat being used. It had clearly been a rough sea. They'd all been seasick, and they thought they'd lost 2 men. As it turned out, Lieutenant Commander Marshall had survived and been taken prisoner by the Vichy French. Interestingly, he had no complaints about his treatment, and he was subsequently released after the invasion. But Corporal Rappaport, who was of Tel Aviv and clearly from the name was Jewish, he indeed had drowned. So just an interesting little aside, because there were competing British agencies. This is where GR were. They were at Imwas, which is near Latrun, and it's a monastery. It's not the famous Latrun monastery, but it's in the Emmaus Nicopolis monastery, and that is shown there on the 1942 British map. So an interesting little aside, really, but I mention it because it's quite similar, smaller scale, slightly more successful, but still lost a man in rough seas and using an inappropriate vessel. So going back to Bosum, as I said, a great disappointment for the HAGANA, for the Palmach, but both sides were determined to continue, and there was then the establishment of SOE training facilities and what was called the Friends Scheme from April 1942 to further train Jewish men of the Palmach. That's another story, but I just briefly show you a map here to show you the different elements of it, because from late 1941, SOE established its Special Training School number 102, SDS 102 at Stella Maris, and other nearby sites on Mount Carmel, and undertook boat training in Haifa Harbor. The second element there was where that training school undertook its weapons training at Lit. The parachute training was undertaken at RAF Ramat David, number 3 on the map. There was paramilitary training establishment, which is an offshoot of STS 102 at the Stella Maris, and that was at Megiddo. And then there was specific Palmach training just down the road from Megiddo at Mishmar HaAmek. So quite an SOE training element there, both for the Palmach and the Jewish population. But as the war developed and the threat decreased from the Germans getting as far as Palestine through Egypt, then the British SOE trained a lot of people for use in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Balkans area. And I would just mention as well that one of the more important personalities in the SOE and Jewish community liaison was this man, who I'm sure you will all know, Abba Ivan, and he was formerly in the South Staffordshire Regiment of the British Army, and of course later a leading politician in the state of Israel. So he was there. He was in a villa with a radio operator in Jerusalem. The final word as to what really happened to Boatswain, and is this the final word? In 2014, there was a very thorough investigation, which was called the final investigation into the 23 fallen soldiers, with further evidence, and I think compelling evidence from the Israeli Navy, suggesting that high seas were to blame and that the boat had simply capsized. And personally, and I know there are lots of other views to this, but personally, I think that is persuasive. Commemoration of the 23 is something I'd like to just cover briefly. And in the run-up to the creation of the State of Israel in 1948, there were two immigration ships. There you see them, both named after the 23 and also after the mate, Amiram Shohat. In 1946, you see both vessels there. They were used for bringing ashore immigrants. There are several street names, and pictured here, you see the monument and gardens in Tel Aviv, and a monument at the Tel Aviv departure point on the Yarkon River, and at the Mount Herzl National Cemetery in Jerusalem. I was very pleased to hear from the Admiral earlier that, about the Naval College, because exactly as he said, Susanna Spector, wife, was the admin manager there. So again, the recognition of the 23 continues at the Naval College. And there are individual memorials dotted around the country. And here's just one example to Ariel Temes, which is in Jerusalem. And in Britain, so I bring you back to sunny Britain, slightly sunny today. It's about 16 degrees and it's not raining, which is unusual. So in 2016, at this place, Brookwood Military Cemetery near Purbright in Surrey, in the foreground there, you see its memorial to the missing, 1939-1945. Although you can't see it, stretching away to the right-hand side of the picture, it continues as the largest British military cemetery. So this is the largest in the UK. And here's a memorial to the missing, 1939-45. You see it there in different seasons. It's really quite a beautiful place. And in 2016, this man, Martin Sugarman, I named him at the start of my presentation as an inspiration for the subject of Operation BOATSWAIN. It was Martin who is the archivist for the Association of Jewish Ex-Servicemen and Women in Great Britain. It was Martin who really put the effort into getting the 23 names added to the memorial to the missing 1939-1945. And they were listed, as you can see there from the photograph on the right, under the heading Special Operations Executive, and they were listed as volunteers. And this is the first time that rank, if you like, a title of volunteer had ever been used on the memorial, but it was recognized that because they were in the Mandate of Palestine, they had a form of British citizenship, and they should be on the memorial as having been missed off before. And indeed, Sir Anthony Palmer was on there. So he had been on there ever since the memorial was unveiled, was constructed. It was unveiled by Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II in October 1958. So he had been on there from the very start. So why shouldn't the Palestinian Jewish lads be on there as well? There are a total of 3,500 men and women of the British forces, and the phrase is, to whom the fortunes of war denied a known and honoured grave. So it's those with no known grave. There are other memorials around the world in places like Athens, Singapore, El Alamein, but this is the main one for Britain. And there are over 100 SOE names on this memorial. The names, having been pushed on there, if I can use that term, by Martin Sugarman, were unveiled by the Israeli ambassador, Mark Regev, in May 2017. So we chose the May date to reflect when Operation BOATSWAIN took place. And Martin had contacted me. We'd done a bit of research together. And he said, quite rightly, I think, that it would look better if it would somehow have more substance to it if the organization was done by a British organization rather than a Jewish organization. And I felt very strongly the same way as well. And so we did it outside of the Association of Jewish Sex Servicemen and Women, and we did it through our own charity, the Secret World War II Learning Network, but very much involving AJEX, and as I shows here, getting the Israeli ambassador to do the initial unveiling of the names. We managed to get a letter from your Prime Minister, Netanyahu. And this was an odd one, but I had heard that he was very committed to social media. So I sent him a message on Facebook, and knowing he was ex-Special Forces, I asked if he might want to send a letter. And he did, remarkably. It came straight to me at my home address. And I had to therefore tell the Israeli ambassador, Mark Regev, who had been the Prime Minister's spokesperson before he came to Britain as ambassador, that I had got this letter, and I thought it was probably diplomatic seniority that he read it out rather than anybody else. So he had no idea that the Prime Minister had written to us, and was quite impressed, but taken aback a little. So whether you love him or hate him, he sent us a letter for the unveiling. Lovely wreath there you can see from the State of Israel, from the Israeli embassy, and a man on the right-hand side there, Ambassador Gershon Gan, a former Israeli ambassador to a number of African countries. He came over because he is a descendant of Amiram Shohat, the mate to the sea lion. And Gershon comes over to England, I think almost every year, and he's been to ceremonies at Brookwood on several occasions now. He was there at the very first one and spoke quite movingly, quite emotionally about Amiram Shohat and the 23. And there you see that we feel it's very important in our network, in our charity, to put faces to names. So we had the little Magen Davids for all 23 of them, and a Christian cross for Sir Anthony Palmer with a photograph of the face. And we created this, which is now always on display at our yearly ceremonies, but it's also on the wall of the defense attaché in the Israeli embassy in London. And since we did this, we have had visitors. And first of all, you see here the son of Spector, the operation commander. So this is Brigadier General retired Iftach Spector, who many of you will know was quite a jet fighter ace in the Israeli Air Force before he retired. As I said, Ambassador Gershon Gan has been over several times and has got publicity for the British ceremonies in the Israeli press, which you see there. And Professor Dan Lebanon, who was the son of Baruch Jacobson, he came over with wife and one of his grandchildren to see the name for the first time. We have an annual event at Brookwood Military Cemetery. You see here, we always invite AJEX along, Association of Jewish Servicemen and Women, and always the defense attachés from the embassy in London. So here you see them over the year. I think we're on our 4th defense attaché now since we started. And indeed, it was during the term of the second one that I first met Erez when he was still serving and was over in London. We currently have an Air Force colonel with us, that's the chap on the right-hand side there. Oh. In 2019, a new book was written by Mordecai Naor, Obscure Mission, the Kaf Gimel Obscure Mission, and I was very honoured, very pleased to see that a photograph of our unveiling of the names made it into the book. And then even in 2020, extra details came out. This was a presentation by the IDF Communications Association, and they had discovered that a radio signal had been received, followed by an extract which they got from the War Diary of 84 Squadron, Royal Air Force. And here it says, 21st of May, 1941, in the morning, so this is 3 days after the Sea Lion set sail, Sergeant Bailey was conducting an aerial recce for a drifting motorboat off the North Palestinian coast, which suggests that we, the British, knew that there was a problem and that the motorboat was drifting. But SOE do not appear to have been notified. But a very, very interesting discovery there as late as 2020. The legacy and the lineage from the 23, as I'm sure you all know, the Palmach. You then had the Palyam, which was the naval company of the Palmach, then the Israeli Naval Service from 1948, and Flotilla 13, the IDF Naval Commando Special Forces unit, created in 1949. And it's been my privilege to have twice been in the boundary of their base at Atlit. I leave you with a thought. It's something that we say at our remembrance parades here in Britain, and the fact that we are conducting an annual service and will continue to do so, I leave you with these words. They shall grow not old as we who are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much for that. That was excellent. I've heard it more than once, and it's always not only exciting to hear again, but there's always new bits to hear. Again, thank you. I really appreciate it. I appreciate the time, the effort, and the many years that you put into, I would say, the commemoration that I know is so close to what you believe in. Again, we're speaking about common heritage, and I think the first, what the Admiral had said, Ben Bashat, about this, what the Kaf Dalet or the 23 or the bosun operators mean for the Israeli Navy, and your slide is a very nice way to end off this lecture. Again, thank you very much. We don't have a lot of time, and we said we would try and finish it about, we have about 50 minutes for any Q&A. And what we're going to do is I'm going to open it up. You know, the people are, we're not a big group. We're a nice group here, a comfortable group. And if somebody has some questions or any comments, please feel free. And we'll do it the responsible way, the mature way, just somebody will switch on and they'll be able to speak when they're finished. If it's a question to somebody specific, or if it's just a comment or something important. Again, thank you very much, and thank you all for joining. So please, any questions or comments, the floor is open.
I would like to thank very, very much Paul. The presentation was extraordinary with the political background, the military background, the preparation, the commemoration in Israel, in the UK. For me, there were few very new elements that I'll check later. And I think that for everyone, even for our people who know and feel that they know the case, I think it was a wonderful presentation, and thank you very, very much.
My pleasure.
Please, any other comments or questions? Okay, I think we're going to wrap it up. I again want to... Sorry.
As I want to say...
Sorry.
One thing that it was no doubt was a fantastic presentation. and we learned a lot. Although I thought that I knew everything, I learned many things from Paul. The only thing that I want to mention that it was surprise, and I'm very proud, the attitude of UK that consider these 23 fighters as part of their fighter. I didn't thought about it. And once I listened to Paul, I completely agree to this attitude, and I think it's a big honor for all of us. Therefore, thank you, Paul, that you presented to us. I'm sure that there are many others, because there is the status right now in UK, but not all of us know about it. And I think that it's a big honor for us to understand that, yes, the British Armed Forces see our people as part of their people. Thank you.
Thank you.
Fine, thank you very much. Thank you, General. If there are no more comments, we will actually close. Again, Paul, thank you very much for that. We've known each other for, I don't know, for a few years. And I appreciate the time and the effort. Again, the presentation is excellent. I think what's interesting about it is not only your perspective, or we would say, sort of like the British perspective. I think more than anything else, it's the professional way of looking at an operation like that in I would say a semi-critical but very honorable way. We all understand that maybe that was not the best way to do it, but I think the way you paint the atmosphere, even the competition between the various British elements in Palestine, SOE, SIS, GR, and the others as well. There's some others out there. That's something that the Israeli perspective misses many times. And from our perspective, of course, the question was how we could get involved and do our bit as well, for different reasons, of course. Some of them personal and some, of course, national aspiration. So thank you very much. Again, we're 10 days past the date. The date was the 18th of May, 1941, the coast of Lebanon, Tripoli. And we are May 2025. A lot has changed, but something stayed the same, unfortunately. And as mentioned before, we hope and pray that we will see better times for all of us, specifically for our 58 hostages, but also for the end and for a better time for all of us, for all over, worldwide, I would like to say. But you can start the Middle East, it'll be nice. So again, thank you very much for joining us. We will probably plan for another one. There were two other extremely interesting amphibious operations on the Lebanese coast that I know of. There have been many, but two really interesting ones. One was I would say, certainly not very successful commando raid during Operation Exporter by the British commandos at the Litani River, which was about a month and a half later. It was not too successful, but it's a British commando raid. And of course, the 1982 hourly amphibious landings by the Israeli Navy and Israeli ground forces, which to all minds is considered to be very successful. So thank you very much for joining us. I will try and make sure that the recording is available, and I will of course pass it over to General Lapid. Good night, everybody. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Erez, also.
My pleasure.
תודה רבה, ארז, זה היה מעניין מאוד.
תודה רבה לכם שהצטרפתם. תודה רבה, להתראות. תודה רבה, להתראות.
תודה רבה.